From KCRW in Santa Monica, this is The Treatment.
Welcome to The Treatment. I'm Elvis Mitchell. You can also hear the show at kcrw.com. My guests, writer-directors Joel and Ethan Cohen, followed their last adaptation, The Lady Killers, with an adaptation of a novel this time out. Their first, an adaptation of Cormac McCarthy's No Country for Old Men. Guys, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us.
I've got to ask, what drew you to Cormac McCarthy? Because in a way, it's almost like he wrote a template for a movie you guys might have done, but in other ways, it's very different.
Yeah, well, we'd always liked Cormac's stuff. We'd read not all of his, several of his novels before this, but actually this didn't come up at our initiative. Scott Rudin, the producer, brought us the novel, actually before it came out, in Galleys, thinking we might be interested in doing it, which we were. I guess it is kind of our kind of thing somehow. I don't know, the regional nature of the story, I don't know. Whatever reasons, which we didn't really even articulate between ourselves, it really appealed to us.
It's only retrospectively, actually, for us that we realized that there were things that in this story that were sort of similar to things that we'd done before.
And I'm imagining that sort of real strong regional sense would appeal to you guys, too, because region and places are so important to you.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know why we've set so many movies in, either in Texas or in the sort of the South. It has always appealed to us. It was one of the things when we read the novel that was... we were actually familiar with the area that the novel is set in.
Oh, you spent time there before.
Yeah. And to go down there and make a movie there about that place was one of the sort of appealing aspects of the whole thing. That's very true.
Part of it is, it's also a regional thing. One thing about the South is people talk a lot. I mean, especially, in Texas, well, everywhere it's, you make a point with the story. It's kind of partly, again, a regional thing.
It's another story set in Texas. Our first movie was set in Texas, although a very different part of Texas. The Texas of No Country for Old Men is West Texas.
Although it's almost the same era.
Almost the same era, that's true.
Yeah, since we've gotten older, the first one was contemporary, and this is a period piece.
Yeah. The funny thing about doing a period piece of that period in Texas is, especially in the area out between sort of, El Paso and Odessa, is that nothing really has changed very much, not even the automobiles. In the last 25 years. You don't have to do a lot of sort of art direction in terms of bringing it back into that period.
It's actually something we worried about because it's odd. I mean, placing the story as a period story because, when I carry the Josh Brolin character is supposed to be a Vietnam vet, but he's, whatever, in his 30s. It all seemed like it might be an oddity for the audience if we didn't peg it in terms of period, and yet, as Joel says, there's nothing really visually that's going to tell you that it is 1980 as opposed to contemporary. Something we fretted about a little bit. We did put a pull tab on a can of beer. We thought, well, that'll kind of say it.
Well, one of the things that sort of fascinates me about this, too, though, is that the movement, the sort of chase aspect of it, you guys emphasize. I mean, because it plays a bigger part in this than it does in the book.
I suppose that's true. It does by virtue of the fact that the book is sort of checkerboarded with these chapters that are first-person sort of ruminations of the sheriff, these just internal monologues, him thinking about things, some of them not even directly related to the story. And, one of the first things that we sort of had to decide, because it's such a fundamental part of the book, was when we were adapting it, was what to do with that. And for the most part, it's not there in the movie, except to the extent that we incorporated parts of it that we thought were important to sort of maintain the voice of that character in dramatic scenes, particularly scenes the sheriff has with his deputy sort of throughout the movie.
But most of it we dumped. I mean, most of it just, there isn't room for everything, and it was a kind of an awkwardness figuring out how we were going to do those, render those long monologues. We completely missing from the movie is the whole sort of discussion of, or not a discussion, it is a monologue, the sheriff's experiences as a World War II veteran,
Yes.
which was interesting in the book. It parallels, the other characters being a Vietnam veteran, and it's interesting that they both sort of, and relevant that they've both sort of seen the worst, but, what are you going to do?
It also parallels or sets up that atmosphere, sets up that place that they've all been through these kinds of things, and it's kind of like a war zone there too.
Well, that's true.
Right.
And there's even a suggestion, more than a suggestion, in the book, which puts the Woody Harrelson character in the movie, Carson Wells, and the bad guy, Chigurh, as being sort of ex-military people as well. It's a more pronounced thread in the novel. And as you said, I mean, by eliminating that, it does essentially sort of foreground the chase aspect of the story to a certain extent. That's true.
It's the treatment, my guests are Joel and Ethan Cohen. We're talking about their new film, No Country for Old Men. I was fascinated that you guys had eliminated that because, to me, that felt kind of central to it, but I didn't realize until I saw the movie how easily discardable it was, because it was all about these war veterans being at war again, really, and in some ways how that was kind of inescapable for them. And you had the sheriff kind of being that voice of experience who had some distance on it, and the other guys were still in the thick of basically a battle. At what point did you decide to discard that? I mean, how early in the adaptation?
Early on when we were writing it. I mean, really, first thing, we as we were kind of struggling with the idea of how to retain some of the feeling of those monologues of the sheriffs, we kind of became resigned to the fact that was like too big, that the war experiences thing was too big a thing to treat either as a kind of voiceover monologue or what. I don't know. It was a puzzle. Or to kind of, the odious thing is, you can have flashbacks, which would have been totally absurd. What are you going to do? It's just,
It's the book is full of ideas, interesting ideas, and in adapting it into a screenplay, you can't, as Ethan was saying before, you can't include everything, you can't do everything, and in a sense, you have to choose the ideas that can be expressed through through a movie as opposed to through a novel. Different medium. It's a visceral sort of. You want to sort of amp the sort of cinematic experience in a way. I mean, the book is already has that, I have to say. So it wasn't like, even in that respect, we had to do a lot. And we were sort of aware of the fact that when we read the book, and that this chase that happens near the beginning of the story is a really sort of interesting, and could be a really sort of interesting sort of set piece in the movie.
There's another, I don't know, kind of quasi-chase sequence in the middle of the movie when the Josh Brolin character leaves the hotel room pursued by Javier Bardem, which actually in the book is more of it seems like almost more of a movie thing. It's kind of a jamboree of bad guys in the book.
Yeah, you guys really sort of like cleaned a lot of the characters out of it.
Yes.
Yeah.
What in the book, that whole episode is much more about Chigurh's confrontation of the sort of Mexican cartel guys that are coming into town at that moment. And
it's almost like he's preparing to go to battle again. That's like another war scene.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. And we made it about him. Again, this is just, I think, in the interest of keeping the lines simpler, in a sense. The sort of narrative lines simpler, made it about the two characters that you already knew, essentially, as opposed to introducing a whole other element in terms of a battle. There's also something nice, to be honest. I don't need that this was even a conscious thing, but it seemed to us that fundamentally this is a story about three men sort of circling each other. And there was an attempt made, I think, in that respect, and sort of what we did there, and sort of keeping it about that.
I guess what's fascinating about that is you sort of boiled it down so it becomes kind of about this collateral damage that these three guys leave by going after each other, which almost, again, feels like something that happens a lot in your movies. One person or somebody coming through an area and leaving a kind of a trail of damage. You could go back to Blood Simple or certainly Raising Arizona and see some parallels.
Well, that's right. I mean, that's just, I don't know.
we've certainly made enough movies about people who sort of
Well, it's
leave
kind
a
of
bloody wake.
Yes, it's just kind of a story thing that I don't know. I was going to say, doesn't everyone do that? Maybe not so much as we do, but things just kind of going to hell is like that's kind of that gets a story going.
Because I have to say, just in rereading the novel after I saw the movie, I said, wow, I wouldn't have seen these things because just making Sugar more of an kind of an inexorable movie villain and removing some of that psychology from him, not really trying to explain him, or in that scene when he's like trying to get to the Josh Brolin character and having to get across the border, that scene in itself could be another whole movie. And you guys just chose to strip all that away. Is it just for logistics too? Is it easier to do it with a fewer people and making it about these three guys?
Not so much that. It's just sort of, again, thinking about what's going to work well in a movie, in a 2-hour movie. Or even, to be honest with you, a 3-hour movie, because we're not interested in that either.
Yeah, no, it's actually true. I mean, it's like a point of pride it had been a point of pride with us that we'd never made a movie that was 2 hours long, and here this one is
2 hours and 2 minutes.
2 hours and 2 minutes. Well, we told Randy Bolsmeyer, who does the credits, that when we gave it to him, we told him it's not 2 hours yet. So if it goes over, it's your fault.
But that kind of boldness of making these three guys sort of like in opposition to each other just seems like it was almost like directing as you were writing, kind of a piece of problem solving that made it more movie-like and simplified it.
Right. It's this sort of problem-solving aspect of storytelling. You've been given a template, a novel, and then you're asked to essentially condense it and to make it into something that'll work as a movie. That you do have to sort of grapple at it. That really, in a pragmatic way, that way. You're right. I mean, absolutely. You do think about it that way.
Because all McCarthy's stuff tends to be digressive. And it's really kind of anecdotal and leads to something by the very end, which is not something that movies often lend themselves to, is it?
No, that's true. I mean, his stories have people telling stories in them, no end.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's The Treatment. I'm talking to Joel and Ethan Coen. Their new movie as writer-directors is No Country for Old Men. For you guys, characters usually express through action. Even though the guys talk a lot, we know who the people are when they do something. And that's not who McCarthy is so much. I mean, people are constantly explaining themselves in those books. And those contradictions come out when they talk about themselves. But
that's true. It's certainly true of, the character that Javier plays in the movie is certainly talks a lot more and explains himself, in a sense, a lot more in the novel than he does in the movie. Although, in another respect, we were aware from the very beginning that there was an aspect of the story where characters sort of completely defined by action, almost in the sense of, we talked about it like a Bresson movie, and that's the Josh character, the Moss character. That's a character that says almost nothing, and you spend a lot of time in the novel, and this was very appealing to us. We thought in the movie, you spend a lot of time watching him do things with his hands or preparing to do things, or, and that's a very, sort of expressing a character in those details is a very sort of appealing thing to us.
That's how we actually pitched the movie to the studio. We were going to do a Bressonian Western, and that's why they gave us all the money.
I'm just writing this down now so I can do my black Bressonian Western next. That's what the world needs, I think.
Yeah, we told them it was going to be kind of like, oh, Hazard Balthazar.
But you shoot the donkey this time around.
With a lot of blood.
The audience loves the donkey. We got the cards back. They want more of the donkey.
But kill him faster. Kill him sooner. He's too evil. It's funny, though, because when you talk about in that sense, there's that sense of loneliness and him constantly tending to himself, which could be almost like a Diary of a Country Priest.
Yeah, or the one that, as said, we've always thought about as most like that is the movie made about the guy, a man escaped, the guy who escapes from a prison cell,
yeah.
And that you spend all this time watching him make little things to get out to prepare his escape. It's all about that, and that's
it's like hypnotic. It's like really spellbinding.
So you're right. But about McCarthy and how often his characters are, do explain themselves in a sense in terms of what they what they say. On the other hand, in this novel, you sort of had both.
We'll take a break and come back. My guests are Joel and Ethan Coen. The new movie is No Country for Old Men. I'm Elvis Mitchell. It's The Treatment.
You're listening to The Treatment with Elvis Mitchell from the studios of KCRW Santa Monica.
Welcome back. It's The Treatment, which you can also hear at KCRW.com. I'm glad to welcome back Joel and Ethan Coen to the show. They were here a few years ago for Oh Brother, We're Out There. The new film is No Country for Old Men, an adaptation of the Cormac McCarthy novel. I'm fascinated by Sugar, who walks into rooms and has to sort of say who he is for people. Yeah. He's almost kind of an expositional device in the book. By taking that away, you have to make it becomes more of a film experience, doesn't it? Because you're having people react to what he's not saying rather than what he's saying.
Well, yeah, we found that it's interesting because the biggest, difference of the screenplay from first draft to last was really subtraction of speeches, and mostly his speeches. We found that the less he said, and less people generally said, but him especially, the less we had him say, the more it seemed like a scene, the more interesting.
Because there's so much about that. You're talking about those scenes with those guys. There's not even much music in those scenes. I mean, really just sort of about all this kind of found sound, and then even the rustle of their clothing is so important. You almost like hear Sugar, the stiffness of those clothes, and that denim is like a body armor for him.
Yeah. There's another aspect in which
That's true. There's something uncomfortable looking about it, which kind of, appeals to...
Not just the hair, but the stiffness of the clothes. I mean,
yes.
Yeah.
The other thing that sort of bears on that a little bit is that in the novel, the character is not described at all, really, physically. Very, very little. He doesn't go into. He says a few things. He at one point describes him as being sort of foreign looking, or he says at one point there's a description of a foreign smelling cologne after he leaves the room. He's very coy about it, and he makes the name sort of untraceable ethnically. He's not telling you who this guy is, what he looks like, anything of that nature. But obviously when you make a movie, you're casting an actor, and bang, there he is. You don't have to describe him. You can see him up there on this, So you've removed a lot of that. A lot of the sort of mystery of the character is now defined, and in order to sort of maintain that, if you have him talking a lot on top of that, you've really, the subtraction of a lot of his speeches was really, I think, a way to sort of get back to the original sort of effect that the character has in the novel, which is to sort of, in a sense...
Which is mysterious, even though he does talk a lot.
Right. But even in the book, though, even though we don't know a lot about him, there's that sense of discomfort that he leaves when he comes into the room. Those details you're talking about sort of take people and then set them ill at ease.
Yes,
right.
Absolutely.
People don't quite know what to make of him, which we wanted to preserve.
And one of the great things about what Javier does in the movie, which is keeping you off balance in terms of what the character is, which I think is sort of embodied a lot in the performance. How, I'm not quite sure, to be honest with you, but he certainly has that effect, I think.
It's the treatment, my guests are Joel and Ethan Coen. We're talking about their new film, No Country for Old Men. Part of that for me is that he's such a physically expressive actor, generally, and he's not doing that here. I mean, every movement is calculated for this character, and I think that's part of, you can sort of sense that... If you've not seen him before, you get this odd sense you don't know who this guy is because everything he's doing is about a minimum movement. And there's actually a kind of efficiency that you guys use in the construction where everybody sort of does what's required of them and not the kind of flourish that we associate with McCarthy. People think of being kind of arid prose, but there's a lot of words there. And here it's really about a kind of bare bones efficiency. And I wonder how you decide to extract that or make that part of what your construction. because it's so different from him.
One of the ways that may be or may relate to what you're saying is just the sort of is the absence of music.
Yeah. Right, no
I mean,
music and like no ornament generally. And I don't know, just kind of the feeling the whole thing kind of.
But also even that kind of, that whole chasing, you could have made it more visually poetic. It could have been more sort of sun-dapple, and it's not. I mean, it's really, there's even an efficiency in that.
Well, yes, but and you can't you can't underestimate also the fact that a lot of what you're talking about, and a lot of is sort of intrinsic to the landscape in which it is set. Part of what was attractive to us about the story is that we like stories that can only take place in a very specific place and that are very much about the place, and that's certainly true of Cormac McCarthy's writing, and it's something that you absorb through the landscape, and here we were able to sort of show the landscape too. I mean, I think that's part of it. But there's
and even at, like just at a base level, you wouldn't decide to do that book and tart it up because I don't know, it would be silly. I mean, it's just
But tarting it up is, there was a lot of talk, and you guys write a lot of dialogue, and this feels like in a lot of ways for you a departure from that. I mean, you've written a lot of characters, almost classic screwball comedy characters who talk too much.
Right. We do like characters who talk too much.
And the dumber they are, the more they talk.
Yes.
Yeah. And and this doesn't happen here at all. I mean, there's not a lot of that. People aren't explaining themselves here at all.
Right.
Even in that way they do, in that oblique way they do in McCarthy, where they're just taking up space by talking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
Although, I don't know, we did one movie. We did a gangster movie where the central character was kind of a ripoff of Dashiell Hammett, and the central character was kind of the Dashiell Hammett guy who's kind
Miller's Crossing.
Yeah, who's kind of nonverbal and enigmatic, and that's kind of actually.
And now that you mention it, there was another movie that we came close to doing that was essentially about a character who doesn't talk at all, and that was in this movie To the White Sea, where after the first 10 minutes of the movie there was no dialogue in it at all. It was about an American airman who was shot down over Japan during the war and doesn't speak any Japanese. So after the first 10 minutes of the movie, it never happened, but it gets back to just this, what you're mentioning, this idea of characters who express themselves through action as opposed to through dialogue, and it, you're right, it is different for us, but it's something that we've been attracted. The idea is something we've been attracted to in the past. We didn't make that movie, but this story we sort of saw as another opportunity to sort of go in that direction.
It's the treatment, I guess, of the Coen brothers, Joel and Ethan. We're talking about the new film, No Country for Old Men. But I saw that because I think about characters. You talk about Miller's Crossing, but even the Gabriel Byrne character is somebody who's wary and is constantly kind of summing things up in his way. I mean, he knows what's going on, and we finally see that at the end of the movie, that he's always been a step ahead. And if you look back at the dialogue, you sort of know he's been paying attention in ways that add up at the end. And here, what we have is a scene pretty close to something out of the book where Tommy Lee Jones has kind of a valedictory speech that doesn't sum things up at all.
Right. The ending of this book is certainly not about wrapping things up in the narrative sense.
Well, I don't know. It is and it isn't.
It is.
Yeah. Right. If it is, it's in a completely different way.
Yeah, but how do you think that it is? Because we sort of, I mean, it's a summation, but it doesn't wrap anything up.
It doesn't wrap any. It certainly doesn't wrap up any plot points.
Right.
Yeah.
No. It's this kind of. It's almost like the end of a Shaggy Dog story. And again, another Cormac McCarthy kind of digression, and that was an interesting thing to include here because after the climactic scene when he comes back, it reminded me in a weird way of the end of Raising Arizona, where it's like almost a dreamlike summary of the movie, but at least that sort of like summed up somebody's state of mind. Here it's entirely different. Mm-hmm. What made you decide to retain that?
I don't think there was ever any question.
But that was how we would end the movie as the novel ended. Yeah. But doesn't it sum up his state of mind? I kind of think it does.
Yeah, but it's weird because it sums up the state of mind in a way that makes him feel kind of peripheral, which is what he is. But it's fascinating to have somebody who's the center of it who doesn't solve anything, and that's...
Yeah, no, that is interesting. just in a kind of narrative way, and somebody who's actually, unlike the Gabriel Byrne character, been a step behind the action all the way through, hasn't figured out anything, hasn't solved anything, and then has a shaggy dog story to end the movie. Yeah, right.
It's really kind of wonderful because I've talked to so many people saying, wait a second now, why didn't they just end it with Shigeru getting away? I said, because that's kind of not the point. I mean, it's not about somebody getting away. It's about futility, finally.
Yeah.
Which is a big thing for you guys, too.
Well, right, futility, I don't know. Yeah, it's about what Tommy's character makes of it, and he's kind of our audience, reader, surrogate. What do you make of it?
Yeah, but to cast somebody like that who's a pretty sort of strong, dominant presence, who is almost like you're casting against audience expectations in a way, because he is that problem solver in so many movies. So to have him be that guy who people have that kind of expectation of, who doesn't do that, I just wonder how intentional that was for you.
Well, that's interesting, although not intentional in that way, exactly. It's not like, it is true that you sort of associate Tommy to the extent that he has that kind of...
Yeah, actually, this is relevant to all this. I told Tommy that we were actually doing a remake of Shakiest Gun in the West, and that for legal reasons we had to change the name of the story to No Country for Old Men. Kind of bid on that.
Because he's a big Don Knotts fan.
He is a Don Knotts fan.
And the scene that really spells that out for people, and I think it really thwarts audience expectations when he walks into the motel room, and there's nothing left to do.
Right.
And you actually you can build tension into that. So you're working to further thwart that expectation.
Right.
Yeah, well, that's the story we were given.
There it was. Yeah, people think this business is all fun and games, but sometimes you just get a story and you go, well, that's what I got to do.
But this one felt to me as an interesting kind of 180 from Lady Killers, which is really kind of tidy, and this is not.
Well, that's true. Lady Killers is very tidy.
Lady Killers, yeah. I mean,
it's all about tidy. That's really true.
Tidy.
It's about tidy. Yeah, you're absolutely true.
And because I wonder for you guys, because you're writing so often, basically all the time, that as you're approaching something like No Country for Old Men, you think, well, this is a way to do something that feels a little bit different from what's come. I wonder how conscious that is for you.
Well, in a very general way, it's conscious. I don't think...
Well, yeah, I mean, certainly the book, the fact that, I mean, if it were kind of a straight genre story, it wouldn't have interested us as much. The fact that it does sort of wander around purposefully is obviously part of what the book is and part of what appealed to us.
Oh, we're out of time, guys. Thanks so much for doing this. Please come back again.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's The Treatment. My guests have been Joel and Ethan Cohen. Their new film is No Country for Old Men. Our technical director at KCRW in Santa Monica is Mario Diaz, with assistance from Lashik Wojciech at Carnegie Recording Studios. Bob Carlson is the editor. Jim Dempsey, the producer. I'm Elvis Mitchell. It's The Treatment.
An audio archive of this and other programs can be found at kcrw.com. For questions and comments about The Treatment, please email us at thetreatment@kcrw.com. The Treatment is produced and distributed by KCRW Santa Monica.